I'm very excited today to have with me Malte Ubl, the CTO of Vercel, a company that we work with very closely, and super excited about what his technology does and how it's transforming agents and vibe coding across the industry right now. Before we get started, we're going to have our chatbot do a few intros here, and we're going to ask it a few questions. So first, Isla, can you tell me a little bit about Malte's former life before Vercel?
Absolutely. So before Malte stepped into the CTO role at Vercel, he spent quite a long and impactful stretch at Google. He was the engineering director for Google Search iDesktop and also the principal engineer for search rendering. Basically, he was one of the key folks making sure that Google the search experience was as smooth and fast as it was on all those different devices. And on top of that, he's also been a big figure in the JavaScript community, curating JSConf EU for many years. So he's got a deep well of experience in both web infrastructure and large-scale engineering.
Pretty accurate?
Sounds all right. Yeah,
All right.
pretty good.
If you were going to tell Malte a joke about AI, what would it be?
Oh, sure thing. Let's toss in a little humor. You know, Malte's the kind of guy who probably thinks a JavaScript bug is just a misunderstood feature. He spent so long making web infrastructure run smoothly that if you told him a good dad joke about servers, he'd probably say, well, at least it's got good uptime. So there's a little Malte-flavored joke for you.
What do you think, Malte?
It's not bad. Yeah,
Yeah.
I'll probably do that one.
Isla, what are agents handling inside of Vercel today based on your knowledge?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the really interesting things Vercel is doing with agents is using them to handle a lot of the repetitive or tedious workflows. For example, they've got agents that help with things like lead qualification on the sales side, basically sorting through inbound requests and figuring out which ones are really worth human follow-up. They also have agents that jump into DevOps tasks, like automatically investigating anomalies in production environments and even proposing fixes. So in a nutshell, they're making agents a kind of digital coworker that handles the routine stuff, so humans can focus on the more creative or complex work.
And my last question, what do you think the hardest and most controversial question I can kick off our podcast with is?
Oh, that's a fun one. I'd say if you really wanted to start with a bold opener, you could dive right in by asking Malte something like, so Malte, everyone's talking about AI reshaping jobs. Do you think CTOs like you will have to convince people that AI isn't here to take over their roles, or is that just part of the growing pains? It's a bit of a spicy question because it gets right to the heart of the whole AI and workforce debate, and it sets a tone that we're not afraid to tackle the big topics.
All right, so why don't we start there?
Right. I'm making sure. The question is whether I'm afraid that CTOs directly will be replaced by AI.
Well, that and just the general workforce fear
Totally.
around AI,
No,
right? And how do you think about that as a company that's pushing agents?
Right. Like I think what we're seeing is that we are like we're seeing replacement of tasks that the human workflows actually likes doing the least, and so at least for now, there is actually kind of this productivity gain at that layer of the stack where people have a better time doing their job. And I think what we've seen in productivity gains in the past is that they usually actually lead to more employment and more fulfilling jobs.
Yeah, amazing. Right. You know, I often talk about people that the hidden thing about AI is what it can do to grow jobs and what it can do to grow economies, you know, from that standpoint. And I wonder how much of that are you guys seeing?
Yeah, I think, I mean, it was mentioned earlier with this one example where we were automating part of our sales lead qualification process. And there was a Business Insider article about it. And they picked up the headline, Vercel, like we have 10 folks doing this, right? And so the headline was that we, reduce workforce to one. But that's actually not really what's happening, right? Like we're, as a company, growing super quickly, and like we would never ever let go of anyone because we have so much other work to do, right? And so it was just that this was very cognitive low work that is also relatively low value, but it has to be done. And now it's done by an agent, and those folks can do other things.
So is it right to say that overall the philosophy is that agents can do the lower value work? That's going to drive the growth of your company. That's always going to make room for more employees and the existing employees that want to retool.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's how I think about it, and I think that's also in practice what we're seeing. I think I've been also talking a lot about just guiding folks to those high frequency but low cognitive load problems. because those are the ones that you can actually automate with AI today. I think people are sometimes picking too ambitious problems where then you have projects that aren't necessarily ambitious.
So let's split that into two questions. My first question is, give me a few more low cognitive, high frequency examples.
Yeah, I think the another one that where we also have, like I talked about it publicly, is that the way we're doing abuse handling. Where we are a large hosting provider, we got a bunch of abuse reports, and like agents are great at investigating them and giving you initial feedback, what's probably the case here, and then you have a human agent do the final decision. So I think more generally, I think in any companies there are processes that are that require humans to do some form of research. And I'm not talking about the like one-off task you give your assistant where you're saying, find me out about this, and then never do it again, right? But more like there's an abuse report, or I get a return on my shipment, or I get any type of support inquiry. Once this goes to a human, the answer should already be pre-computed. That's the thing you can do today, and that's the thing that happens in any company. So even if you're not comfortable doing fully automated response, you can give the human I've done all the research, and you only have to do the synthesis work, the actual brain work. You don't have to Google things, you don't have to go find things in internal resources, etc.
So give me an example of things that you feel like are too ambitious. Like you kind of talked about, hey, things, maybe problems people or you've seen taken on that just are too much right now and that don't work well.
Yeah, I think one of my theses is why our intuition, especially as developers, is slightly off, is because coding works incredibly well, right? And so this is both what people experience in Cursor and Cloud Code, or vibe coding tools like V0 that we make, where you have this absolutely magical experience and you think the machine can do anything, right? That's I think the baseline that people have. But the reality is, why does it work so well? It's because there is this inherent ability to validate whether code works in an automated fashion that allows the AI to train on making programs that work, right? And there's a lot of training data as well. And essentially any other domain does not have this property. Now, you have a lot of work going on right now to build these scaled reinforcement learning labs in around Silicon Valley, but that's all future stuff. So right now, any type of advanced decision making, like really doing a report of some financial investigation that has never been done before. That type of stuff doesn't quite work yet at scale. But anything where you can, where it was not trivial in the past to just put if statements in your code to handle all the cases, right? But you can still kind of reason about like what is the space of ideas that I need to handle this. That's stuff that works. There's stuff beyond that's difficult.
Do you think that's because of this whole idea that the patterns of thought aren't new and novel, or do you think it's more of just our sophistication of how we use AI needs to evolve?
Yeah, I think it's just that the AI has to be trained on a larger problem space, and many of them are actually much more difficult to train than code. But again, the good insight is that of those things that are both low cognitive load and high frequency, every company has so many of these that it's just not necessary today to even think much beyond it. Because these are tasks that are both high impact because you do them a lot, so lots of people are actually doing them. So that's high impact to stop having lots of people having to do them, and those are most likely successful projects.
Awesome. Talk to me, we use your tools a lot for vibe coding. It's been really exciting for me. I can get on, I haven't done engineering in a really long time, and I'm able to get on and do vibe coding, and it's incredible what the platform can do. What do you see as both the promise and kind of also maybe the pitfalls of kind of vibe coding and what your platform produces?
Yeah, I think in an enterprise setting, which is what we on V0 are most interested in, is that you think of V0 as a coding tool or as a building tool, and that's all true, but I've come around to really thinking about it as a communication device. I go to the meeting and I bring a demo. I don't bring a document. And what that then does is that you no longer rely on people's imagination of what you might want to build, where 5 people have 5 different ideas, and in the worst case, 6 months later, the engineering team comes back, it's like here, and you're like, well, that's not what I meant, right? Instead, you come with what is maybe not fleshed out at every aspect, but essentially the product you want. You come to the meeting, everyone knows exactly what you want, and so you minimize risk, and you eliminate the need for future communication. And in my experience in a software engineering process, that is actually where all the time goes. And so that's why you get these incredible efficiency wins, even though you only quote unquote did a small part of the project, but you avoided so much miscommunication that it's an incredible win.
Look, I would tell you I have seen that in spades. I mean, one of the biggest examples I would share with you is that I had our tax leader, and he was in a vibe coding session, and he made this kind of tax regulatory application that was taking all these API feeds from everywhere, and he was so excited about it. He was like, literally, he's like, Vikas, I've been asking my team to do this for me for 2 years. I've been trying to express what is on this screen right now, and he tried to steal the laptop on his way out, and I had to try to tell him it was a trading laptop, and he couldn't take it. So how do you kind of think about that speed, though? And so it is elongating some of the process. Now, how do you start to think about the next mile, and what has to happen after that?
Yeah, I think it depends a lot on the type of application that people are building. Like our goal with V0 is definitely for example, for internal apps to just go through to production from that moment on. Or that you have a sophisticated production app and you have non-developers make changes to it. That's also something that we want to support. But beyond that, there's definitely the prototyping use case, right? Where you get started and eventually someone else takes over. I do find we should talk a lot about the like quote unquote internal apps in companies, which I think is an incredible use case of kind of democratizing who can build things, but also kind of now facing the next generation of shadow IT that's probably 100x bigger than what might have already been perceived as a problem in the past.
Yeah, right? So tell me a little bit about that, because I think that is what we struggle with, is how many, should we create an app marketplace? Should everybody vibe code their own little apps? Does that create too much sprawl, or is that the world of hyper-personalization that we have to start getting comfortable with that we're entering?
Right, yeah, I mean, I think I would say yes to every single thing you said. What we're preparing is a future in which we are essentially professionalizing the existence of the sprawl, because it cannot, it won't be avoidable.
You can't stop it.
You can't stop it.
It's
and it has real problems. It has real benefits, right?
Yeah.
It's
probably real benefits and real challenges.
Exactly. So I think the immediate term steps we are taking it's actually something we announced last week as a collaboration with Snowflake, but where the pattern, which I call secure vibe coding platform, actually goes way beyond Snowflake as one potential backend. And so essentially the idea is that there's a whole new model of how I need to think about applications. In the past, they were made by engineers. And this whole idea that it's an engineer that comes with the notion of competence, of trust, right? Of I can trust them to do it the right way. And I don't want to say the vibe coders are incompetent, but I'm also not saying that.
Trust me, I am an incompetent vibe coder.
I cannot trust them, right? So so the idea is that when they make an application, it must be secure, even if I can't trust them. Now, I cannot trust someone is different from they are malicious, right? But assuming they're not malicious, but they are, they just cannot personally judge whether they did a good job, right? So I need a platform that's secure anyway. And so the way we did this, and this is what our collaboration with Snowflake is all about, is that there's 2 main aspects. Aspect number 1 is whether I have access to the application, the authentication. It's not a concern that the application decides. So the entire notion of auth is extracted from the application, and done at the platform layer, so that the application cannot get it wrong, because the
access, everything is kind of
everything
that's
is
around the perimeter.
Yeah, exactly. And the other thing is that the application actually doesn't even have any access to Snowflake.
Yeah.
It all comes from you when you log in. And so if you're allowed to log in, the application uses your credentials to talk to the backend. The backend decides, well, their country manager, Germany, they only get that data, right? And so where the app is now no longer in charge of having thought through all this stuff, right? So data access is managed on the backend. Authentication is managed on a layer by Vercel on top. And so the app only provides very specific logic that's facilitating the specific thing it wants, but avoids essentially both of those major pitfalls.
Yeah, so the way I hear you saying it is like, look, secure the perimeter,
Yep.
get your security right, make sure you have roles-based access both into the application and for the data that you're using, and you know that. And at that point, you let people dream and imagine that hyper-personalization that they want to use.
Exactly.
And probably underneath, the patterns oftentimes of what people want to develop in an app too are very common in terms of, hey, it's some workflow, maybe it's a Ask chatbot. It's like where do you see that coming into play?
Yeah, I think there's definitely standardization that you want in an enterprise, right?
Yeah.
It's patterns around the design, accessibility, the tooling, right? And so in vZero, we are adding all these features where at the enterprise layer, different organizational structures, you can define certain first principles for how things are done. But again, because the whole point is that people have freedom, right? So it's only getting, it's steering things in the right direction, but you don't want to limit the fantasies there too much.
What's the coolest thing that you saw vibe coded?
Oh my God, there's been so much. Like the thing that I think is the coolest in the abstract is that AI is fearless. So it's mind-blowing for your tax lawyer that they can build an app that does their calculations, right? And that in a way that's we got our accountants and our tax
people. That's right. What PwC is.
That's a game changer. But you can then go to that app and say, well, give me a 3D visualization of the tax form, and it will do probably quite a good job. And if you go to your front-end engineer, who's maybe an expert in that, and ask them to do the same thing, they probably actually are not a 3D animation expert, right? Because otherwise they probably would work in computer gaming. And so, but the AI has that it's fearless. It's not afraid of math, right? It's not afraid of 3D graphics, and so you can actually kind of go way beyond what any of your developers traditionally would have been able to do.
Awesome. Let's flip a little bit to your role as a CTO. You guys ship fast. I've seen some of the speed at which you operate at. How do you do that? What advice do you give others? What changes did you make to the traditional model that allow that to happen?
Yeah, good question. So we have this notion at Vercel called innovation token, where we try to not spend innovation token on everything, but we have done I think what is in a way a true innovation in the space of how we ship. So and this is actually in the intro you mentioned that I work at Google on the search team, where my job was to approve launches, and you just cannot imagine. Maybe you can imagine, but the process was so slow and so bureaucratic.
There's a lot of approvals. There's a lot of things. There's a lot of bean counters.
and there was power plays happening, where how quick you answer. Maybe that depends on how senior you are, and you want people to know you exist, and so you don't answer in 5 minutes, right? So all this process was very, very slow and archaic. And so we completely turned this around at Vercel. We actually don't have approvals. What we have instead are vetoes. And that actually, whenever someone hears that, it first sounds
it's interesting.
That's worse.
Okay.
Right.
I got to think through that.
But the idea is that the default is that you get to ship. And so if legal has a problem, they need to raise their hand, say, bro, you cannot do this, right? Or the same with the privacy team, and the same with the with the product team and the go-to-market team, right? They all get to say, have questions, I need answers. But the idea isn't that I need to go to them and ask for permission. The idea is that they need to pay attention, and because what happens in reality is that almost all the time it's like trivially fine, right? And so, but then every so often something's actually a problem, and so so that's why it's better to default to it being fine and having people speak up. Now, what is very important is that there is a burden on the person who wants to ship a feature or launch a new product. They have to communicate well, because obviously this whole thing falls down if the legal team never had a chance to know you were going to do this, right? So
how do they know?
Nobody must ever be. So communication is a big part of this, but it's like it's a key feature that you have to communicate and people have to pay attention. And there's a bit of a push-pull thing, but the outcome is that we've been able to move fast without kind of sacrificing compliance and other aspects like that.
So the answer is, like, instead of saying, get to know, get to yes.
Yes.
Or kind of like flipping that script around, which I think is interesting. But how do you see that with engineers aren't traditionally the best communicators? I mean, I'll be fair. Unless I'm stereotyping, which you can tell me.
Yeah, we're like a very Slack-forward company, okay. And so we have rituals there where people have to, where there's weekly summaries that we make sure that folks have.
Do your agents help with that?
So what we do have is a whole process of how we track what people are working on, and then delivering updates from there, and that's fully automatic. We have a team that's called ShipOps, and they are engineers whose job it is to automate our shipping process, and that is largely not on the like DevOps side, which is like which is like how do you actually ship, but it's like this team is responsible for the process, and so part of that what they're doing is that they are doing automated updates like that. Exactly.
What's the biggest thing in that process of automating DevOps? What have you seen make the biggest impact?
On the DevOps side, I think the biggest impact is if you buy Vercel, because that's really what we do, right? Yeah. Like in the traditional, like in the development process, you traditionally have, I think, DevOps folks who are very production focused, and it is partially a nuisance, partially just was never really planned to have very professional and highly productive pre-production environments, and so Vercel has certainly wrapped that on this hat, where like there's essentially for everything you do in your entire life cycle, there's always a URL. It starts with a V0, but then eventually developer takes over and they push and they get a URL with the changes and so forth. And so that's like ultimately the notion of preview deployments, of always having something visible, always having something you can send to a stakeholder with your current work is, I think, the most impactful thing.
So you talked a little bit about what you brought differently into Vercel from what you experienced previously. Talk to me about the vice versa. What did you take from a large company that you felt like a startup really needed?
Yeah, what I like to mention is the thing that really Google got right is that you have this notion that there is, if you think about a career path, that there's a career path for individual contributors. I think most folks are familiar with the Peter Principle. Most folks are familiar with a traditional company setup where at some point your career like requires you to become a manager to go to the next level. And so this is something that Google just straight up doesn't have, right? There is the only level that only has a manager is a CEO, but otherwise there's so-called senior fellows, which is the same level as the SVP, which is the level under the CEO, and it goes that way all the way down. And so that's something we took over for Vercel. Because I think it's really, really like, there's just no reason why your best engineer would also be an incredible manager, right? There's also no reason why they wouldn't be, but like it's essentially not correlated. And so I want to make sure that all these folks have a career path that like bets on what they're good at and doesn't require them to change career.
Makes sense. What do you think inspires engineers the most these days? What do you see on your team that really motivates them to ship faster?
I mean, I think in general, engineers are just motivated to ship fast. They are motivated by celebrating launches, by celebrating small things, right? Like Vercel itself is on a trunk-based development where everything we do goes to production right away. We use feature flags a lot, and we try to ship relatively small units. And so I think people are just really motivated when they get to have things be out there and used by people and get feedback.
What's the best advice that you would give companies right now getting started with agents?
Okay, on the agent topic, I mean, I think we talked a little bit, and I'd like to make it a little bit more concrete what it means when I say it, concentrate on high frequency, low cognitive load tasks, right? What we've started recommending is that you start with employee interviews, and these are the employees kind of doing your frontline work, and because the space of the world is large, this could be very different works, right? But people were, you might be, depending on the size of your company, you might have 10 of them, you might be 100 of them, you might have 1,000 of them which are roughly in a similar role, right? And you pick out some of them, maybe the best ones, right, who excel in this relatively low-level role, and you essentially ask them, what do you not like about your job? What is the thing that you if you could pick that you wouldn't have to do anymore? What is that? And I think the magic of this type of interview is that it yields answers which somehow fit the sweet spot of what, if you then build an agent to do it, would actually be a successful project. Because it hits the sweet spot of it's probably, the reason why they don't like it is because they're bored, right? And that happens to be, first of all, the AI doesn't get bored, ever, right? And second of all, it can do these tasks that are where you don't need all of your brain. And so those, again, this will lead to projects which are successful, and they're high impact because you're doing them so often that you're just saving a lot of human hours.
Awesome. All right, I'm going to close out with some rapid fire questions.
Okay.
What's the first app you open every morning?
X or Slack.
Okay.
Yeah.
What is your favorite thing AI prompt to kind of do in a chatbot?
My favorite AI prompt.
Could be personal, could be work, could be both.
I recently asked, I'll tell you something else. I told ChatGPT I'm a CTO, and now I get all these executive summary which are actually not that helpful, I think, because I actually care about the details. And so I
decided you were too senior?
Yeah, I decided I was too senior. So I told ChatGPT I'm a mid-career expert level software engineer, and now it's working better for me.
What made you want to be a developer?
So I started super early, and this was in the early mid-90s, and I just always wanted to be a developer. I was very drawn to it. I first tried C++, and it's not like it didn't work, but I was semi-successful. And I actually took a book about nowadays kind of fringe programming language called Smalltalk on a snowboarding vacation. And I came back and I was like a developer. I learned it from a book, but it completely clicked, and I never looked back.
And then what is one word that would describe your leadership style?
Impatient.
Well, I think that's good for a CTO that wants to ship fast.
Yeah.
Malte, thank you so much for being here with me today. Really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us, and your advice and insights were amazing. So thank you.
Thanks for having me. It's super fun.